Okay, for geometry fundamentals, today we're going to do lesson 6.5. This is on trapezoids. Okay, so starting with a definition of a definition of a trapezoid, this is going to be a quadrilateral. So remember, quadrilateral means it has 4 sides, right? And it has exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. So this is not a parallelogram. Okay, so we can see this picture. The lines or the arrows here and here, that tells us which sides are parallel. So the parallel sides, these are called the bases, okay? And the non-parallel sides, so here and here, these are called the legs of the trapezoid. And then it says a trapezoid has 2 pair of, we call them base angles. So for example, A and B would be a pair of base angles, and D and C would be a pair of base angles. One more additional definition is an isosceles trapezoid. Now recall back when we were doing triangles, an isosceles triangle had 2 sides that were congruent. So a trapezoid that is isosceles has the legs are congruent. Now remember, the legs are the ones that are not parallel. Okay, so the parallel sides, just a quick note, the parallel sides cannot be congruent. If they were, that would turn it into a parallelogram. Remember, I said a trapezoid can never be a parallelogram. Okay, so this goes back to chapter 3, and we actually did it a little bit when we were doing parallelograms. Same side interior angles. If 2 lines are parallel and they're cut by a transversal, then same side interior angles are supplementary. When we did this in our previous lesson, we were talking about consecutive angles, but it's only going to be between the parallel lines. So you see how here the parallel lines? That's going to make these 2 add up to 180 degrees. And then on this side, these 2 add up to 180 degrees. Okay, but in a regular, in a trapezoid, the angles are not going to be congruent. They're going to be supplementary between the parallel lines. So for example, if this is 160, if I did 180 minus 160, that would be 120 degrees at the top. But on the other side, these are completely different. So do you see the right angle here? So remember, a right angle is 90 degrees. So at the top, 180 minus 90 would also make that 90. And then just remember, if you want to check your answer, all 4 angles still have to add up to 360 degrees because it's a quadrilateral. Okay, let's take a look. EFGH is a trapezoid. Find the missing angle measures. Okay, so again, figure out which ones are the parallel lines. So that makes, if this is 90, this has to be 180 minus 90. So angle H is 90 degrees. On the other side, if this is 50, right? So again, these 2 have to add up to 180. So if I do 180 minus 50, that's going to give me 130 degrees at the top. So this will be 130. If you want to pause it and try the next one on your own and then come back and we can check. Go ahead and do that. Here, EF and HG are parallel. So that's going to make these two add up to 180. So if we have this is 125, 180 minus 125 is 55. So H is 55 degrees. And on the other side, these two add up to 180. So if this is 30, I would subtract 30 from 180. And that would give me 150 degrees for angle F. Again, these are not parallelograms, so the opposite angles are not going to be congruent. Okay, now if we have an isosceles trapezoid, each pair of base angles are congruent. Okay, so these are not opposite angles. These are ones that are next to each other. So if you look here, these are the parallel lines. If these two sides are congruent, then D is congruent to C and A is congruent to B. Okay, so here we go. ABCD is an isosceles trapezoid. That makes AD congruent to BC. So these base angles are congruent and these base angles are congruent. So it's like the two at the top and the two at the bottom. Well, if D is 100, that's going to make angle C 100. Now remember what we were just doing. I was saying that these two angles have to add up to 180. So, well, that's 100. So 180 minus 100 gives us 80 degrees here for angle A. Well, angle B also has to be 80 degrees because the two base angles are congruent. So we can easily kind of just match. And again, you can double check, make sure all four angles have to add up to 360. Let's look at the next one. This is still same direction. So these two are congruent, which makes these two base angles congruent and these at the top are congruent. Well, if angle C is 70 degrees, angle D is 70 degrees. And then here, B and C have to add up to 180. So if I do 180 minus 70, I get 110. So 110. Well, that also makes angle A 110 because the two base angles have to be congruent. So the two at the top are congruent and the two at the bottom are congruent. Okay, mid-segment of a trapezoid. This is a new segment, a new definition. Mid-segment, if you think about the first part of the word, we think middle, okay, or midpoint. So this is the segment that connects the midpoints of its legs. So here, right, we have the two midpoints and it's just going straight across. Now, there's two things that we need to know about the mid-segment. First, we need to know that it's parallel to the bases. So do you see the arrows in all three segments? That just means all three are parallel. And the length of the midsegment is half the sum. And on your paper, I believe there are parentheses here. So it's half of the sum. Another way to think of this is you could also think of this as being the average of the two bases. So if you think about taking two things and averaging them, what do? You add them and you divide by 2. Dividing by 2 and multiplying by a half are the same thing. So if you prefer to think, oh, I'm going to add the two bases and divide by 2, right? So base 1 plus base 2 divided by 2. Usually students prefer that instead of multiplying by a half. So let's see, find the length of the midsegment MN of the trapezoid. So here's MN, okay? So MN, if you want, maybe some students prefer to put an X here. So X is going to be the average of 8 and 14. So if I take 8 and 14, add them and divide by 2, so 8 plus 14, that's going to give me 22. 22 over 2 is 11. So the length of MN is 11. Now, a quick way to check to see if we did this correctly. This mid segment should be right in the middle of 8 and 14. So if you think about it, 8 plus 3 is 11, and 11 plus 3 gives us 14. So if it comes out to a whole number, it's pretty easy. You can kind of just check and make sure you got that right. Okay, the mid segment this time, okay, our trapezoid's drawn sideways, and that's fine. I'm going to try and find MN here. And I have this time, X is going to be the average of 10 and 6. So I'm going to take 10 plus 6 and I'm going to divide by 2. So that's going to be 16 divided by 2, which gives us 8. So 8 is MN. And again, you can double, just look at your numbers, 10 and 6. Yes, 8 is right in the middle of those two measures. Okay, example 4, find the value of the variable. And I believe these are our last problems here. Okay, now, this is not an isosceles trapezoid, so there's no congruent angles. All I can see is that these are the parallel sides. So I know 2x and 62 have to add up to 180. And on the other side, 3y and 42 have to add up to 180 because these are same side interior and these are same side interior. Okay, if you want to pause it and see if we get the same answer, you can go ahead and do that. Okay, otherwise, here we go. We're going to subtract 62. So 180 minus 62 gives us 2x equals 118. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And that's going to give me 59 for x. All right, over here I have 3y plus 42 equals 180. So I'm going to subtract 42. So 180 minus 42, I'm going to get 3y equals 138. Divide both sides by 3. And I get y equals 46. All right. B. Okay, this has to do with the mid segment. Okay, so whenever you have that extra line in the middle, so 17 this time is the mid segment. So 17 is going to be the average of the two bases. That means I'm going to take 15 plus 3x minus 2, and I'm going to divide that by 2. Okay, so let's see. We get 17 equals, I'm gonna put the 3x here. And if I take 15 minus 2, that's going to be plus 13 over 2. Okay, little trick here. I have to solve for x. Well, how can I isolate x? Well, I can multiply both sides by 2, or if you want, you can always put that whole number over 1 and then just cross multiply. So that means I'm going to take 17 times 2 and 1 times 3x plus 13. So this is going to give me 34 equals 3x plus 13. I'm going to subtract 13 from both sides, which gives me 21. Oh, looks like I should have given me a little more space for this one. We're going to divide both sides by 3, so we get 7. Okay, last one. Oh, so I noticed that these two angles are congruent. That makes this an isosceles trapezoid. So if the base angles are congruent, then the sides are congruent. So I know 4x has to be equal to 6x minus 8. I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides. That's going to give me a negative 2x equals negative 8. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2, which gives me a positive 4. Okay, now to find out what y is equal to, if the base angles at the bottom are congruent, then the base angles at the top are congruent. So I know 2y has to be equal to 106. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So 106 divided by 2 gives me y equals 53. All right, and that concludes lesson 6.5. And so now you're going to work on 6.5 homework.